Hi, welcome to the First Nations Voices podcast. My name is Daniel and I will be your host today. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are on today, the Ngunnawal people, and their elders past, present and future. So today I'm here with Marina Martiniello, who works at the University of Canberra, and she is responsible for indigenising the curriculum. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Daniel.
What is indigenisation and why is it important?
I'd also like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the lands of the Ngunnawal people on which we meet today, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging as well. Okay, indigenisation, why is it important? It's really important to understand that their culture has been here for 60,000 years and then they've got ways of being, knowing and doing that are very valuable and long-lasting, for want of a better word. So it's really important that we acknowledge those ways of being, knowing and doing, and making sure that we incorporate them into our everyday practices and things that we do. And that's really why it's really important to for the indigenisation.
So then why is this program important to you?
Okay, so this program to me, I'll give you a little bit of background first, if that's all right, about the indigenisation here at UC. So this is actually identified as a national priority from the higher education sector as one of their national priorities. So as part of that, UC took on this indigenisation initiative and made it a strategic focus for the university. As part of that, we're looking at the indigenisation within the curriculum to embed those Indigenous ways of being, knowing and doing within the curriculum. Ways of doing that are also incorporating it into teaching practices, so teachers and academics incorporating into their practices, and some of their governance that they might function within their own teams and things as well. So for me, this is a big project. It's a fantastic project, and makes me really proud to be a part of this, and being able to lead the university in this sector, or work with the staff in this way to bring this indigenisation about.
Then what do you think of the definition of indigenisation, including the framework? And would you be able to give an overview of that to our listeners?
Okay, so the indigenisation of the framework was developed back in 2019 with consultation with the Ngunnawal elders and community, Indigenous community at UC and outside of UC, and went to the academic board here at UC for approval and sign-off in last year. Literally as I came on board, employed at UC, so that framework was developed before I came on board. The framework itself has three focus areas, looking at Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous content and Indigenous ways of being, knowing and doing. So based on Yanka Porter's 8 ways of learning, and incorporating those ways and those pedagogies into curriculum as well, so that all students will undertake and understand that they're using these pedagogies in their learning, and using those three areas then to come together to meet the Indigenous graduate attribute, which if you're not aware of, that was fairly recent, came on, was added again last year. I think it was towards the beginning of last year, and the Indigenous graduate attribute is to give students to build their skills and knowledge in Indigenous histories and cultures and things like that, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures, and their context within their disciplines, so what students are studying, as well as practical applications or opportunities where they can engage those skills and knowledge that they learn along the way by interacting with Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people and working with them, in particular through their professional practice units, core units, which all programs have. So when they do things like placements and internship and projects and things like that, they'll eventually, as it all gets involved and things like that, they'll get those opportunities.
Well, then has there been any pushback, like with the program? Has there been any reluctance to engage with the program from any students or even staff?
No, so at the moment, so my role is I actually work with the staff, directly with the staff, to work with them to embed these things into their teaching and their classes and their courses and things like that. So this is really the first stage of the implementation. So what's coming out of that is that there's a real engagement, like a real keenness, eagerness for people to want to do something and to start this process and engage in this process. There is a little bit of pushback's not the right word. I guess more of a reluctance or hesitation would be the better word for some staff to do this, because they don't necessarily feel confident in that they might do it the right way, or are they doing it the right way? What can they do? What are they allowed to do? How can they do it in a respectful way, and that kind of thing. Which is part of my role is to guide them through that process a bit as well. So they're also taking on, so those that are already doing things or have attempted things and worked through things are starting to mentor and buddy up with other academics and things as well. So there's a real champion sort of effect happening now with people taking it on. So it's really heartening to see.
So with the reluctance you mentioned, what has been the feedback from the students and staff around that?
So for students, I don't have direct contact with this. So the feedback that I hear from students is actually comes through academics that have worked directly with the students. For some students, there has been where it started off. It was a challenge for them to understand what was happening and why it was happening. But as they progressed through their learning, and that by the end of it, they were quite engaged with the process and with what they were learning, which was fantastic. It can be challenging, I think, just in general for anybody, in that when you're learning about something for the first time or something that you might not be familiar with, that has quite confronting elements and aspects to it and things like that, particularly in Aboriginal culture when we look back and we think about the oppression with Aboriginal people, stolen generation and those kinds of things, that it can be confronting for people to number one, realise that those sorts of things actually can happen and have happened, but also for some people it challenges them to think about their own identity and their own unconscious biases and perspectives and how they view things. So it's quite a learning journey for anybody to undertake and can be very challenging, but also extremely rewarding.
Okay. Well, then, so then what do you hope to achieve in the next maybe 3 to 5 years with this curriculum? Okay,
so the idea for UC, so UC has identified a goal of making sure that the Indigenisation happens to all programs, so with all programs across UC, so that would be in that time frame that happens, with a view for it to then become that business as usual, that sort of practice for staff, that when they're undertaking or writing a new course or a course is going through reaccreditation or whatever's happening, is that Indigenisation is automatically a part of that process from the very beginning, and mapped through from the course learning outcomes to the units to content, learning assessment, right through to meet those graduate attributes. So that's the goal for UC in that space. think that pretty much answers that question.
Yeah. So then, do you think this will make a real change? And if so, how much of a change will it bring?
Yeah, I do think that it will make a real change, because the idea of this is to make sure that this is really embedded throughout curriculum and throughout teaching practices for staff and things like that. So being able to be a part of that, it'll be a slow change, but to be a part of that and bring that change along, I think that it really gives UC an opportunity to be a leader in that respect with universities, and to provide students with a real holistic education around all of this. So, being able to interact with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people effectively,
Yeah, that all sounds great. And that's all we have today on today's episode of First Nations Voices. So thank you very much for your contributions, and perhaps whoever's hosting here can have you on again.
Thank you, Daniel. That would be fantastic.
And we'll have a next episode coming up very soon, so stay tuned.